This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com with a special edition. It's not wrestling today. I've done numerous UFO interviews, and this is another one. We have an author who recently won second place last year in one of the contests for your writing. You've written numerous books on UFOs and you work for MUFON. And I'll let you explain all your credentials because you're one of the foremost authorities on UFOs in the world today. So maybe you can explain to the audience here some of your credentials in this field.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, UFOs, never thought in a million years this would be something I'd be looking into, but pretty much devoted my life to it. It's been about 35 years now since I started studying UFOs. Kind of fell into it when I found out my brother had seen a UFO, and it turned out my sister-in-law had as well. People at work, friends, very close encounters. I'm talking, seeing grays face to face, missing time, onboard experiences. So it was a real adjustment, hit me like a ton of bricks, and was not really willing to believe in this without research. Checked out all the books, found out that there had been a lot of people researching the subject for literally decades, and just threw me for a loop. I haven't been able to pull myself out of it. Yeah, I've written, 24 books, about 100 articles, joined all the UFO groups, MUFON. I took their field investigators test, which was actually really difficult. It was a take-home test. I thought, take-home, this is going to be easy. It wasn't really. I mean, a lot of meteorological questions, questions on astronomy, photography, of course, UFO history, and so on. But I did well enough to pass. And yeah, I've been investigating UFOs for a very long time now, interviewed hundreds of people, and know quite a bit about it. Yeah, it's a real phenomenon. I can tell you that. The evidence is out there, for sure.
You started researching it in 1986, and it was a lot harder to find evidence in those days. Now everyone has camera phones. I mean, a lot of them aren't real unidentified flying objects. Once people like you research them, there's other explanations, but there is a percentage that cannot be explained, as the Navy has recently gone public with in the US. And that's what really has piqued my interest, because they're actually admitting that there's unidentified flying objects out there now that their pilots have seen, and they don't know what they are. They don't know if they're Russian, Chinese, or from another planet, I guess, or another system. Were you shocked that the Navy has come out with this? Because this seems to be the first steps towards disclosure.
Yeah, in a very long time. Decades practically. I mean, there's been no movement, and a lot of pressure from, certainly the UFO community and people who are having this experience, and the pilots who have to deal with this, who get grounded, by the way, if they go public, or used to. In fact, the incident that really got me involved occurred in 1986 to he was a pilot, Kenju Tsuroshi, and saw UFOs over Alaska and went public with his account and was grounded as a result. The Navy, at the higher levels, and certainly all branches of our military, take this very seriously. It's a very serious subject. They know it's real. I am really pleased to see that there is movement, but I'm kind of not surprised, because if they did not start making disclosures, they would start to lose control of this situation. It's become really volatile. We have a situation now where there's almost an open conspiracy. More people, believe our government is covering up information on UFOs than don't. It's pretty apparent at this point, if you look into this phenomena, that it is real. If you're a skeptic, I get it, but I'm betting that you probably haven't done your homework, because there are thousands of landing trace cases. There are hundreds of what we call radar return cases that are corroborated with eyewitnesses on the ground, and sometimes photographs, multiple eyewitness testimony backed up by lie detector tests. I mean, we have implant removal evidence. We have medical evidence, including both healings and injuries. There's no doubt this is a real phenomenon. And for the government to deny it, and actually to call UFO witnesses liars or drug addicts or crazy, which has been pretty much their official policy for years, is beyond disingenuous. I mean, this is using our own tax dollars to make us look like complete fools when they know full well this is a real phenomenon.
So
Project
that's why a lot of people don't come out, right? Because they're afraid of having that ridicule against them due to the stigma about it.
Yeah, which is changing, thank God, but it's been a lot of work. And I think, yeah, people are beginning to take the subject much more seriously. I always ask people, is it all right if I use your name? I know when I write about their experiences, and most people will say, yes, it's fine. They're fine with it. They want people to know about the subject. I've talked to a lot of Navy guys, by the way. There was one Navy guy, gosh, can I tell you his story? It's one of the,
Of course.
oh my, gosh, one of the best interviews I had in a while. Ray Sachs is his name. He was an electrician's mate on the USS Clamagore, which was a submarine that carried nuclear weapons. This is back in the 1970s that this incident took place. I verified, his military records, by the way, just so you know. And he was aboard the USS Clamagore, and he said he'd been aboard other submarines, but never had anything strange happen. He gets aboard this submarine. Strange things started to happen. And this is what we see. UFOs appear to be attracted to nuclear power. But at any rate, he had this amazing USO incident. USO I mean unidentified submersive object. So he was put on watch duty with another petty officer, the commander, and the second in command. And they were heading up the East Coast in 1971 at night. And this is, got 5-6 miles off the East Coast of the United States. And maybe traveling at about 12 knots. They're on the surface. And suddenly they see this white glowing object come booking up from the stern, the rear, at about 100 knots. That's very fast, twice as fast as our submarines can go. And this thing came right up to the submarine and actually paced it for the next about 15 minutes. Right off the side there, not far away at all, far too close for any, two ocean-going objects. It was huge, it was white, it was underwater. They couldn't tell quite how far or how deep or how big it was, but it was big and bright and pretty close. And one by one, all the major officers came up on deck and looked at this thing. And were like, no, I don't know what it is. Oh my God, and went back below. And the second in command, this is all from Ray Sachs, this guy interviewed, second in command turns.
What was his rank, by the way?
He was an electrician's mate. I'd have to look up the exact rank.
Okay.
So I don't know that. But he was on watch duty and heard the second, he's talking with the other watch officer. Oh my God, who is it? Maybe it's Captain Nemo, blah, blah, blah. And the second in command is like, shut up, don't talk about this, and turns to the commander and says, Captain, how do you want me to record this in the log? And the commander says, officers who record this type of event do not move up in rank. Pretty much an exact quote. So it wasn't recorded. The second in command turns to, Ray and the other officer and says, don't talk about this. I don't want you talking about this. And of course, they go below and all the other officers rush up to them like, what did you see? It's the buzz of the ship. And they did talk about it. And he's still talking about it. He's 67, he's retired. And it's a very interesting story. And I think shows how our Navy is, dealing with this on an official basis, which is not recording it. And I have to believe this, commander did report it to his superiors because that's his job. But how do we know?
And why aren't they firing on these objects? Because likely they'd be able to obviously evade the firing or whatever is done, but you would think that our vessels would want to protect themselves against this possible threat if they see something like that.
Yeah, I think there was a period in military history where we did fire on these objects and it didn't go well for us. That was mostly the Air Force in the late 1950s or mid 1950s, and we lost a number of airplanes and pretty much stopped doing that. So this is a sort of event. I've interviewed other Navy officers who've had this very similar events. One guy I interviewed was a submarine navigator, and he was off duty. He was retired, but taking a boat up the west coast here in Southern California, up towards, through Santa Barbara and north of there, which is a very active area, by the way, for underwater UFO activity. And he was actually the second of a convoy of boats and had lost track of the other boat. There was a storm, and they were no longer in radio contact, and they came upon this bank of lights, like stadium lights, and they were in a place where the depth of the water was far too shallow. They're heading up the west coast here, and they're looking to the right, which is right along the coastline, and there's a boat or something there where there can't be. You're not allowed to sail there because of the rocks. And so it's very puzzling to them, and they were trying to work out what the heck this could be when suddenly their own depth sounder malfunctioned and said they were in 10 feet of water, which they knew they weren't. They were pretty good navigators and could see where they were. But still, this was, two things that they're not able to explain. Had a period of disorientation. Next thing they know, these objects are in front of them and moving off to the, their left side, port side, and stop. And they're looking up at this thing, and he's like, Preston, I've seen every ship out there, and I could not tell you what this is. It wasn't a ship. It was a bank of stadium lights, far brighter, and a lot of them, and it was far too close. It was about a quarter mile, and they couldn't see any shape because it was just too bright. And at some point they panicked and they're like, we've got to move on. This is not doing, it's getting a bad feeling from this. So absolutely, this is not ours. And to see our Navy coming, forward, saying, yeah, pilots can talk about what they're seeing is great news. But it's a little bit like, here's a little picture of a blurry UFO, when behind the curtain here is the crashed UFO and the alien bodies. And they're not quite ready to roll that out, I guess. But that's got to come at some point.
So in the one video that they did release, that's been on CNN and Fox News and all over the place, you do see that the Air Force was able to actually lock one of these objects on target. But when you're listening to the talk, they're kind of excited that it's a UFO, where you would think if that was a craft that could possibly be an enemy craft, they would actually fire at it. So I'm just wondering if you think there's some type of order that they are aware not to fire on these type of objects if they see them in U.S. airspace, even though they must be considered enemies if they haven't alerted us that they're here.
Yeah, you would think so. I can't really answer that in an official capacity because I don't know. But what the situation appears to be is that a lot of these pilots are not informed about what they're going to encounter out there, and go through kind of a trial and error, trial by fire period of training, I guess you'd call it, where they learn. Certainly, this is what, I say that because of what the eyewitness testimonies that are coming out from pilots, both within the military and private for that matter, who have encountered these things and come in for landing and are subsequently questioned by the Air Force or some faction of our government. Often it's, men in black types who don't want to reveal their origin, what intelligence operation they're from. The OFSI, Office of Special Investigations, that comes up. NSA, usually, Air Force.
Didn't the Pentagon recently also admit that, yes, they have had a program? They claimed that it was abandoned, I think, in 2012. But before, they were never admitting that they investigated this stuff. And now they've come out They said they had a program, but they said funding was cut to it. That's the story that they're telling us. Um, so
Right.
what do you think of that? Do you think it's actually was abandoned, or is there more programs obviously looking into these potential dangers to the country?
Right. Well, according to whistleblowers, this is one of the highest level subjects within the government, one of the most important, one of the most top secret. It would be mind blowing and inconceivable if the higher levels of our government were not putting an enormous amount of money and attention to this subject. Officially, no. There's been, Blue Book, the Condon Committee, the Robertson Panel, a few scattered, intelligence agency investigations into the UFO phenomena. The CIA did the Robertson Panel, uh, USAF, the Air Force did Project Blue Book, and all of these are kind of whitewashes, sort of really more a publicity stunt. And this isn't just me saying this. This is, J. Allen Hynek, the father of modern ufology, who defected, essentially from Project Blue Book. He was the astronomical consultant and said, "This is ridiculous. The Air Force is spending far too much attention on cases that have prosaic explanations, obviously Venus, as opposed to the really good cases," which, by the way, they didn't even get. The very good cases never reached Blue Book. Anything that affected national security was sent directly to the Air Technical Intelligence Command. We know this from documents released through the Freedom of Information Act. Gosh, I get all fired up on the subject. Our government has bungled it pretty badly. I get it. It was a difficult thing. But now that they're forthcoming, we're taking steps in the right direction. Absolutely every intelligence agency in our country has looked into this and is still looking into this phenomena for sure. And we know this. This is not speculation. This is demonstrable through the Freedom of Information Act, as is the cover-up of UFO information.
Now, you mentioned underwater unexplained submerged objects, which you're an expert on. For people that don't know, these are not like permanent submarines that necessarily stay underwater all the time. These are actually UFOs that can go underwater and move around underwater, much like they're moving around in the air.
Yes, exactly. A UFO and a USO are essentially the same thing, but you can't really call an unidentified flying object flying if it's swimming. So that was a term that people came up with to sort of differentiate them. But yeah, they're the same thing. These objects have the ability to go in and out of the water, very high speeds, by the way, and have been clocked traveling under the water at like 1,000 miles per hour or more, just like they're moving around in the sky in some cases. Most no. They move much slower underwater than we usually hear, which I do find interesting, but not always. And I am thinking, certainly I know in this area off the coast here where there's an enormous amount of activity, that there are parking lots down there of USOs, large numbers of objects. It's an easy place for them to hide. And in this area, not only is there a long history of USO activity in a really sharply defined area, right here between Catalina Island and the mainland, which makes me think, what's going on? Is there a base? Or, what? This is very strange because it's one of the top 10 producers in literally the world. But there are about 5 cases and another 10 or 20 after that involving, not 1 or 2 objects or even 10, but 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 100. There are 3 or 4 cases involving over 100 objects. So where are coming out of the water or from below? So that makes me think they're using our oceans probably more than we've ever really looked into before.
I see. Now, why do you not think that there's been more of a mass sighting in recent years? I think the Phoenix Lights was one of the biggest sightings in recent decades, but that was before everyone had cell phone cameras. Now, I think if something like that happened, you couldn't deny it as much. Why do you think there hasn't been anything more widely seen in recent years?
Yeah, I've been wondering that myself, I have to tell you. because that's the pattern we see. When the Gulf breeze came around in the 1990s, early 1992, and then it was like followed up by the Hudson Valley wave. And there had been, a huge wave in Whitfield, Virginia, and then Belgium, and Mexico City, Topanga Canyon had a wave. There's these waves that are fairly regular. Stevensville, Texas, was another one, and we're overdue for sure. And I don't know why it hasn't been, other than it's a very tense time now in a number of areas. Perhaps that has something to do with it. I feel like one is coming, and it's very possible that these incidents are often covered up. There is a news media blackout on this subject. It's very difficult for it to break into the evening news in an international or national even forum. So that could be a factor. There may have been some waves that have been effectively covered up. I don't think so, because usually it reaches just a tipping point where there's just no way. You can't cover this up. So I'm guessing we're going to get one. It's going to probably be in some small town next to a big city center, which is what we usually see, sort of thing. Or I don't know, but I feel like we're definitely overdue, and it's going to be a big one.
I truly believe that's why we're seeing now that the government's telling us that these exist, but it's not being reported front page news like it should be. But just to prepare us, because at some point they're not going to be able to deny it if there is a mass sighting like we were just discussing. But what's one of the best cases if you're a non-believer, say you're a combat sports fan just watching this because maybe they're a fan of my channel, but they don't actually believe in this type of phenomenon? What's one thing you would tell them to go look at that might change their mind? Obviously, I've been researching this for the past 5 years or so. I'm no expert. You definitely are, so you'd be the one to say.
Right. Well, that's a difficult question, because the evidence for this subject is spread out a bit, and there's also disinformation, and there are hoaxers out there, and there's a fringe element, and there's a lot of people who are desperate for help who are having this experience. So it's a very difficult field to navigate, to say the least. There are some really good books out there. I like the books of Timothy Good, for sure. I think Bud Hopkins, the work that he put out, really reflects what I found. You know, gosh, there's some really great cases for sure in terms of what I've investigated. There's the Coronado Island UFO incident, which involved 6 people who, actually, it's much larger than that. We found out there's quite a number of people who, it's called a mass abduction. And this occurred on March 1994 on Coronado Island. And I interviewed all the witnesses, and it's a crazy case involving medical evidence. Yvonne Smith, another California-based investigator, is really the lead on this. And she's also written a book, as have I, with another UFO witness. It's a great case. And if you're a skeptic, I challenge you to read that. The Topanga Canyon wave was another case that I worked on, which just blew my mind. To date, I've interviewed about, well over, 50, 100 witnesses for that incident alone. But I found about 30 separate adult witnesses, groups throughout the canyon. This is right off the coast here, on one night, June 14th, 1992, who all saw stuff in the sky. A bunch of people called the police, a bunch of people called the newspaper. It's an incredible incident involving UFO landings, UFOs chasing cars down the road. It was a giant wave that went on for 2 years. That was by far my biggest case.
And what year was that again? Sorry.
Yeah, 1992 to 1994.
Okay.
That was the subject of one of my earlier books.
So there's some video footage of that, I imagine, of people with camcorders in those days.
There are some cameras, or some still pictures. There's a police tape that's out there. I don't know if anyone captured that on actual video.
It's more of a poorer country, I guess, where that took place.
No, not necessarily. 1992 92, 94, I guess, wasn't quite the cell phone era.
Yeah, no, you'd have to have a camcorder for sure.
Which isn't super common at that time.
Yeah,
And you know how UFO sightings are. They're like, lightning striking or a wild animal running by.
yeah.
Not easy to photograph. And I have to tell you, there's been several incidences where I've researched where people did have cameras and it didn't help. There was one really amazing incident on Catalina Island involving, let's see, it was 11 witnesses who are young adults, photographers, artists, up and coming actors, two of who became insanely and wildly famous, by the way.
Are
Won't talk to me.
they won't say their names or
No, and I would, I found out who they are, but
yeah,
you would know them for sure, and they
yeah,
don't want to talk about it, and I respect that. But I have talked about 3 or 4 of the witnesses who were involved in this incident, and it involved these UFOs that came very close up, and they observed them for over an hour, and they started, flying around this group, sending out beams of light. It was clearly unknown objects, and there were photographers here. 3 of them were professional photographers, and about 4 or 5 of them, had cameras. And they all brought their cameras out to photograph these things, and not one of them would work. None of their flashlights would work. All their watches went off. So this
yeah.
was clearly some type of influence by the objects. And I have other cases like that. And I know of other cases.
Cars will turn off too, right? I've read that cars will suddenly lose the ability to drive.
Yeah, but not always.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? So this to me, and I think this is what the military figured out when there was a wave of car stallings in 1954, that it wasn't random. That wasn't just a UFO approaching closely. It was a UFO sending down what we would probably call a target, a focused beam weapon, of some sort to disable engines. They do have this ability, and this is what we saw in the Hudson Valley wave, where there were a lot of people who tried to take photographs and couldn't. And certainly I've seen that in another case, which coincidentally was on Catalina Island at the other end, where there was a group of Boy Scouts who saw a lot of objects. And there was at least a couple of them who had cell phones. And each time in both cases, I mean, when they tried to take a picture, the battery of the cell phone, which was at normal high levels, 80, 100, went down to 0. And after the incident, went back up to normal.
wow, that's pretty insane. And let's get into it now, just before I go any further. If someone wants to look up one of your books on the internet, I know you're on Amazon, but where else can they find them, and where can they follow you before I go any further?
Yeah, if you just Google my name, Preston Dennett, it should take you to my website. The actual address is prestondennett.weebly.com. It's 2 N's, 2 T's. Yeah, I have all my books there. You can contact me through my website. This is a subject I take pretty seriously. It's fun to joke about, and I know people are like, haha, I've never seen a UFO. It doesn't affect me. Well, it does. This subject is very serious. It has the ability to change the environmental crisis, the energy crisis, the economic crisis. We have the free energy of UFOs. We have the crashed UFOs and the technology inside it, and it's not being released. And people don't have to work, like wage slaves their entire lives just to survive. There's enough for everybody. We don't have to suffer through this climate crisis, the economic crisis. It's all manufactured anyway. This unequal distribution of wealth, all this is connected to this subject, which is why it's so tightly controlled, by the Navy, who is really the ones who are controlling this, by the way. The Navy was before the Army. The Navy was one who pretty much started the whole military and intelligence. So they're the ones who are in control of this.
Now, who told you that there's crash ships? I know you've interviewed hundreds of people, maybe thousands, on this subject, but how are you so certain that we've had these ships, and I guess we've been able to figure out some of their information on how they operate and so forth?
Right. I have done, I've interviewed some whistleblowers firsthand, certainly. But initially, as a young investigator, it was the work of Leonard Stringfield, who was really the pioneer into UFO crash retrievals. It had originally been written about by Frank Scully back in the 1950s in his book Behind the Flying Saucers, and nobody wanted to look into it. They said he had been duped, he had been hoaxed, and there were no such thing as UFO crashes. And it wasn't until, of course, Roswell, that story broke, thanks to the work of Stanton Friedman largely, uh, and Jesse Marcel, a primary witness, that people are even looking into this subject at all. Raymond Fowler, another very well-respected investigator, interviewed a witness. His last name was Stansel. He went by a pseudonym for a long time, who was involved in a crash retrieval in Aurora, Arizona. So if you sort of peruse the UFO literature, you start to come across these accounts, which are backed up in some cases by just a few eyewitness testimonies. Cases like Roswell, dozens or hundreds of eyewitness testimonies are backing this up. Roswell was really the case for me that convinced me that there's something to this. It's no doubt Roswell happened. It's not just Roswell. There's the Aztec crash. There's the Aurora or Paradise Valley crash in Arizona, Kecksburg, Arizona. And as I really delved into this and started interviewing my own witnesses, and more books started coming out by like Robert Wood, who really is another leading researcher in this. They found hundreds of crashes across the United States and the world, which sounds like a lot, but I wrote UFOs over California. I wrote UFOs over New Mexico and a number of other states, Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New York. And they all have accounts of UFO crashes. There is no doubt that this is happening. There are enough whistleblowers. We have some really amazing people pushing the disclosure movement.
Why are they crashing, by the way? Like, what is the main reason why they would crash? They're so high tech.
Right. We don't know precisely. There's a number of theories. One is that, the Roswell case, that it was struck by lightning. Another is that it was being affected by radar, our own systems, which was screwing up with their navigation. Another is that we're actually actively shooting them down. Another theory is that some of these are actually gifted to us, given as essentially, because let's not forget, these ETs are able to abduct people out of hotels, out of crowded suburbs, condominium complexes, from moving vehicles, from their homes in the suburbs, and essentially shut off whole neighborhoods and evacuate streets from cars and just do things that we don't quite understand. And why they can't recover their own crashed UFO doesn't, some of your researchers are raising questions about this. And I have to wonder, yeah, so it's a little bit of a puzzle for sure. But I think if you look into it, it seems that they're just, there are accidents. And that's what it comes down to. And yeah, we have probably shot some of these down with particle beam weapons. And I think there are obviously, some accounts of what we would call diplomatic relationships with our own government and ETs, and perhaps an exchange of technology. So there's that whole aspect. It's a very complex phenomena that's very hard to get a handle on. So, gosh, it leaves you in a number of different scenarios, which all appear to be taking place.
And a lot of people that are new to learning about this don't realize that there's many different types of UFOs and species of ETs. It's not like, even if you look at this world, there's so many different cultures and stuff. It's not like they all might have the same intentions. Would you be at all concerned that you mentioned how some of them could help us? Have you ever heard of any species that, obviously you mentioned abductions, but one that might have a negative intention for the Earth?
No, I don't see that. And I say that with utter honesty and looking at the evidence as objectively as I possibly can. I'm not frightened about this. I don't feel like ETs are here to eat us or take over our planet and that sort of thing, because that's not what we're seeing. And they certainly have the resources to do that. And instead appears to be more of a quarantine situation where they're not openly announcing their presence, perhaps in a sort of a weird way they are. I mean, there are these waves of sightings, but it's not so overt that we can, prove it conclusively. So it's a tough situation.
Is there a typical abduction experience? You mentioned these abductions. Obviously, various species might be treating people that they're allegedly abducting differently. Some might be a little rougher.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was going to touch on is, the ET behavior and, are these guys hostile? I mean, because kidnapping, someone while they're driving down the road is not nice. Coming into the room at night and pulling them into a UFO and, taking off their clothes and examining them is all well and good, but it's against the law as far as, pretty much all countries on Earth would define it. So that's a problem. And I don't think that that's coming across to the ETs, or they haven't gotten it, or they don't care. But their bedside manner of the Greys, generally speaking, is not good. But if you were to look at their behavior from a bell curve of human behavior, I mean, their umbrella of behavior of Greys is the same umbrella of UFOs. They're doing the same darn things we would do and do. If we could, I mean, we'd certainly be doing the same thing to them. What we don't see in terms of people who are taken on board is what I would call overt sadism or torture, which certainly happens to humans. There is, an aspect of, domination and arrogance and using humans for experiments against their will, but it's not to intentionally hurt them. And in most cases, not all, if a person is in pain, the ET will attempt to, reduce their pain or to soothe their emotion or to try to at least understand. In some cases, they do have I'm talking particularly about the Greys here. You mentioned there are other species. Yeah, there's a lot. It's not, when I say the Greys, that's a big umbrella too. There are little short emotionless Greys that are taller, sort of more emotional, more understanding Greys. They're hybrids. There are praying mantis. There's a bunch of different types. But the Greys
What
are
about the tall whites? They're around too, aren't they?
right. Reptilians, a catch-all category of humanoids, both tall and short. It's very hard to define because there's a lot. But primarily, I think what we're seeing in terms of interacting with us are what I would call human-looking and praying mantis type and Greys. And a lot of the Greys aren't emotional. Some are. They have an agenda to do. Their race is apparently dying through genetic damage and too much cloning, and they're not able to reproduce. And are essentially human, it's my understanding, but just have extensive genetic damage and are trying to replenish their genetics with our own genetics, which is the purpose of the abductions. It's an emergency for them. They don't have time for niceties, and they're just got to get a job done. So I think that's why we're seeing kind of a rough angle from this. But I have to tell you, I wrote a book called The Healing Power of UFOs, which documented, no lie, 300 cases. I think that's the tip of the iceberg of people who've been healed as a result of a UFO encounter. And when I say that, I mean being struck by a beam of light or being pulled on board or what have you, and healed of flesh wounds, cuts, broken bones, burns, minor illnesses like colds or infections, headaches, so on, kidney stones, liver disease, serious illnesses of all kinds, diphtheria, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, arthritis, jaundice, AIDS, 40 cases of cancer. There is a very benevolent side to this as well that is not well publicized. And I can tell you without reservation that one of their agendas is to heal people. because there's enough cases to show that there really are. And
In an abduction situation, there can be deaths. Basically, you're saying.
um, healings is what I'm saying. There are healing.
Oh, I thought I heard you say kill people. One of their agendas is to kill people. You said
No, no,
heal.
heal.
Oh, heal. Okay. Okay. The
which
opposite.
which is very, very different. Not to say that there aren't negative experiences, because certainly I've talked to people who've had um, absolutely horrific experiences. There is a scattering of cases out there where people have been struck by a beam of light from a UFO and suffered horrendous consequences. I mean, they basically got radiation sickness and died. That's what happened to Joe Prestes. And a couple, there was a scattering of cases. There was a bunch down in Brazil where people were just having a terrible time with this. But generally speaking, no, this is not what we see. When someone is taken on board a craft, the thing we hear most often is they're physically examined. I hear that all the time. The Greys will say, don't be afraid. We're not here to hurt you. We need you to come with us, that sort of thing. And that's usually what
So
most
they'll
people hear.
speak in English, some of them.
Or Spanish, or Italian.
Okay, really.
Yeah, it's
But
usually
that's not their native language. They have their own way. I've heard some of them sound like dogs barking, but you're saying they can communicate.
Yeah, and that appears to be pretty much universal aboard UFOs, regardless of ET. And for that matter, when people are aboard UFOs, multiple witnesses, they can communicate telepathically as well. So it appears that maybe they're in a higher dimensional space, which, by the way, is what some whistleblowers who have gone inside crashed UFOs have mentioned, that when they go inside these UFOs, time passes differently. If they have nearsightedness, they can see perfectly. They have telepathy, things like this. So there's something, about that there for sure.
Well, Travis Walton, I recently interviewed him. People can look that up on this channel. And he was one of the ones that said time passes differently too. But where would you rate his case on a credibility scale? You've investigated a lot of cases. I'm sure you're familiar with his.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. We've done conventions together. Very high, 10. I think it's an absolutely authentic case. There's been attempts to debunk it. None have been successful. All these guys passed lie detector tests, except for the guy who was crying and too upset. And if you talk to the police who were on the scene, they were absolutely convinced the men were telling the truth. These guys were so freaked out, they were not going to go back up to there to even look for the Travis. It's an absolutely authentic case. There's physical evidence to support it as well. I mean, you go back up to the landing site, and they actually found it, and the vegetation is growing at twice the normal rate. So they've got some really interesting evidence to support that case. I think it's one of the quintessential cases. I mean, it's really one of the ultimate cases, certainly the 1970s, and really helped break this field into the mainstream a little bit. Yeah, I absolutely think it's real, and definitely support it.
Now, I've heard someone I'm sure you've heard of Charles Hall say that in his experience, he said that if you were to startle, let's say, a tall white, that could be a bad thing if you were a human. So you kind of are better off to just be relaxed as possible if you're in a situation around an ET. But in your experience, chances are no one watching this is ever going to get abducted. But obviously, they're going to be terrified, and their first reaction might be to run or to try and fight one of these creatures. What would your best reaction be if someone's in a situation where there's an abduction attempt?
Yeah, well, in most cases, the ETs will impose paralysis upon a person, which I think is done by some sort of a device, though it may be mind power for all we know, because we do react, violently when startled. And I've interviewed people who have reacted violently and lashed out. One lady I interviewed, she jumped up and kicked the gray in the neck and presumably killed it. It stopped the abduction, but she felt really bad afterwards. I just interviewed a guy from England. He reached out and tried to choke the gray. In another incident, he punched in the face, as did Travis Walton. Um,
Yeah.
so, you know, that's probably not a good way to react. You know, what I found is that one lady I interviewed, she had these grays walk into her bedroom and she was startled. She'd never seen a UFO. She certainly knew what grays were. This is in like the late 1990s at this point. She's like, wow, and she had heard, kind of some scary stories about him, but she got just this really good feeling from him. And as soon as she did, they let her paralysis go. They just lifted it, and she was able to sit up and interact with them. And this is what happened to, Jim Law from Gainesville, Florida. And it's what happened to, gosh, what's his name? Another guy interviewed who had an abduction in North Carolina inside this triangular craft. It's very scary at first, but after a while, he kind of got used to it, and they gave him freedom of movement. So my advice would be to relax as much as possible, because this is happening for whatever reason. If they want to do it, they're going to do it. There are resistance methods. I'm not sure how effective they are. And for that matter, people who are like, oh no, this is too. I don't think this is a demonic phenomenon, as some religious people have put forth, which I've looked into extensively, by the way. I studied demonology, and I did research cases firsthand of people who were possessed, and it was horrific. And it's not UFOs. It's not what we're seeing. It's a completely different pattern. It's a completely different phenomena. I don't think this is something we have to be afraid of. I think ultimately their agenda is positive, and I say that because when people are given a message when ETs speak to humans on board a craft, it falls into three main categories, and it's all positive. One is the warnings about the environment, nuclear proliferation, pollution, global warming, overpopulation, warlike ways. Another is about alternative energy. Don't use fossil fuels. There are other ways. People are taken into the engine room and shown how UFOs work, case after case after case. And thirdly, it would be like spiritual information of some type. People are shown how to do astral travel. They're shown about past lives. They're shown about how to do channeling or psychic reading, hands-on healing. So these are all very positive things. And I think that's why I'm not worried about this. I think it's going to turn out just fine, ultimately.
I'm sure it's different with many cases, but in the cases that you've seen from a spiritual standpoint, do they speak of a higher power? Is it more your energy and your body is just kind of your vessel, and your spirit is out there?
I haven't done a study on that. And it's something I really want to look into, is sort of like what do ETs think of God, and that sort of thing, because there are some cases that speak to that, where ETs do seem to mention that sort of thing. Usually not. There's not a whole lot of information about it. We really don't know a whole lot, to be perfectly honest, about where the ETs come from, how their society is organized. Is there a hierarchy, which there does appear to be, with the grays being at the lower end, perhaps, and the praying mantis, or the human-looking? I don't know. I mean, we just don't know. There's one case that I thought kind of spoke to that a little bit, investigated by Constance Clear. She was interviewing this guy from Texas who was having encounters and recalled them primarily under hypnosis, but had one experience, which was one of his last or later experiences, where the ET was talking to him. She says, "We're done with you. This is going to be your last experience. We're done with you. Aren't you glad?" And he's like, "No, I'm mad as hell." And she's like, "Well, what's mad and what's hell?" And he's like, "Wow." And he explained this all to her. And she's like, "Oh, yeah, we have a lot of trouble with human emotions." But at one point she says, did you know I am the highest ranking female to ever reach this command? I command this ship. And when I heard that, I thought to myself, well, that's interesting, because that tells me that there is sexual discrimination among grays. and that there is a a military structure similar to ours.
I've heard that about the military structure as well. So, if you were to hope to be abducted by one species, from what you heard, would you say it'd be that mantis species? They probably have the nicest intentions.
Uh, Gosh, it's so hard to say. I've gotten to the point where I kind of take each uh, person who's had a contact on an individual level, because two people can really have the exact same experience and have completely different reactions. One's like very horrified. I mean, there's a case of a lady who was cured of cancer, and she is not happy. Another lady who has had her, gallstone removed, and she is just horrified because these ETs came in and operated on her without her permission. Yes, it was a healing, but she didn't, ask for this or even, give her permission. Whereas most people who have, a healing are like, wow, I'm very grateful and look upon this as, a very benevolent phenomena, and the ETs as being absolutely not hostile. So again, we see this bell curve kind of skewed towards the more benevolent side with the ETs, I would say. I could not prove humanity is benevolent, but I think ETs I'd have a much easier time of doing it. But there's different agendas. I mean, the praying mantis can be very scary for some people. They're very tall, not 8, 9 feet tall. And reptilian are often portrayed as malevolent. But I have to tell you, I've gotten some accounts where they were not malevolent at all. So it's very hard to sort of pin this into one category and say these guys are bad, these guys are good. Because even with the grays, you get people who are like fine with their experience, and others who are not. So it's I have a difficult time with it. I still flip flop a little bit because I'm talking to this guy in England. He's like, no, they put a needle in my head, and I cried out in pain, and they didn't care. And I shed a tear or two over that because this guy was absolutely sincere and couldn't find help anywhere. He's like, my God, the first guys talked to me and took me seriously.
Now, why, when you hear about these cattle mutilations, obviously a lot of people believe those are also extraterrestrial, but the cattle seem to be killed when they have these experiences. Do they have like the distinction between animals and humans? That they just see humans as more important species, so they don't kill us, but an animal like a cow, they don't care about?
Well, yeah, there's an element to that. There are a lot of people, and this is something I do hear fairly regularly, like, they don't care about me any more than a lab rat. I was nothing more than that to them. And I have to respect that, whether they're wrong or right, that's their experience. And we hear it enough to know that, this is, gosh, like I said, terrible bedside manner at best, and could be much worse. Because what we do see is evidence of genetic manipulation for perhaps a long time, perhaps millennia, if you believe some of the ancient writings and some of the stuff that's coming out on this. So could be that we're nothing more than their experiment to them, and that it's all about genetics. And yeah, there's a very, very wide genetic variety here on our planet, and they certainly seem to be interested in that. Now, as far as cattle mutilations, I have looked into that. Because I wrote UFOs over New Mexico and UFOs over Colorado, which just happened to be really the center for cattle mutilations in really the world. And so, God, it's grim. I'm
Yeah.
looking at some of these cases, and I don't want to get into the gory details.
And it's police reporting this and rangers in those situations too. It's not like necessarily crazy farmers or wild people. Like these are investigated situations when they find these cattle.
Right. I think the first impulse was to say, "Oh, this is satanic sacrifice," but it became far too widespread. And what we're seeing is technology to kill these cattle that we didn't have or don't have. Laser-like technology, no drops of blood. Animals, predators, flies wouldn't touch these carcasses. which is unheard of. A carcass will disappear in 3 or 4 days out in, in the wild. These were not. And sometimes we're found on tops of trees and just places where they can't be. So it's clear that this is UFO in origin for the most part. There are black helicopters, which may have multiple explanations. I think primarily it's probably our government keeping tabs on what these ETs are doing, which is harvesting our cattle for genetic material, which is perhaps hard to produce in a lab, but when you can just harvest it. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me though, because if they are as advanced as they are, can they just build a ship and grow cattle in it? That sort of thing. I mean, really, you need to take our cattle, which has led to speculation among other researchers that the cattle mutilations are actually more about testing the effects of nuclear radiation, perhaps, because there's a lot of nuclear fallout that happened in some of these areas, or perhaps levels of pollution, or these sort of things are we're just trying to find theories on it because we don't know. I think in some cases there's a weird government connection that hasn't been completely figured out. But it's clear, I think the ETs are doing it, and it's not just cattle. It's pretty much every creature on Earth, and I'll even include humans in that, because there are some reports of that, which is rare, thank God. But you have to remember there's a lot of missing people too. And that's become more of a center of attention recently. There's a series of best-selling books out on Amazon now about people missing in the woods by Steph Young. And I know David Paulides has looked into this. And gosh, I know of many cases, well, not many, but certainly a number of them where people have been taken to a UFO and not returned. So you have to wonder about that as well. Yeah, the abduction or the mutilation phenomena is absolutely real. And we just don't quite know what is going on there, but it is still going on. It's absolutely still going on.
Well, you've been very generous with your time tonight. There's a lot I could still ask you, but I don't want to overwhelm the viewers the first time I introduce you. So maybe we could have you on again. I will put some of your book links in the description of this video, but if you want to tell people where they can find your books, and also if you could finish this off with one of your favorite investigations that you've covered.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have my website, prestondennett.weebly.com. My books are available on Amazon. My latest book is Schoolyard UFO Encounters. It's about 100 cases where UFOs are hovering over schools, which I wrote because there's a number of famous cases that are getting a lot of attention right now. There's one in Rua, Zimbabwe, 1994, where a UFO landed next to a playground and some 60 children saw this, and ETs. And people think this is an isolated case, so I'm here to tell you, no, it's not. I've interviewed a number of people firsthand who've had this experience and got cases from literally across the world, across the United States, South America, Mexico, Canada, England, all across Europe, China and Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Africa. So this is a worldwide phenomena and stretches back, 70 years, 170 years, and it's still going on today. So it's kind of what I'm working on right now, and I'm pretty excited about it.
Now, you mentioned Canada there. What do you think the Canadian government knows? Because I don't know how much information the U.S. government might be sharing. I actually talked to someone that had a good position in the Canadian government about this, and they said they never heard anything in their job. But then there's people like Paul Hellyer, who I've interviewed, who I think is the highest ranking person to go public about UFOs. He was the former Canadian Minister of National Defense. But what in general do you think Canadians governments might know?
Yeah, well, they had Project Magnet, which looked into this, and Paul Hellyer, yeah, I heard him speak, got his book. absolutely a delight to see that this man of that stature is coming forth and saying the things he's saying, which is flat out, ETs are real and there's multiple different races and our government is working with them. So Canada has made further steps in disclosure than I think the US has in some ways. And I'm not sure the US is going to be the one to disclose. They're a little bit behind in a number of different areas on our planet, for that matter. And so I don't see why they would be the first. It wouldn't surprise me at all if, it's some other government, Chile or, Mexico or Brazil or, Canada, France, who knows? But I think it is coming. The cat's out of the bag. Disclosure is a movement that is not going to go away. UFOs are not going to go away. And we're going to see, probably within our lifetime, a very different world in which UFOs are treated absolutely seriously, taught in schools, and seeing a UFO is not going to be something that's going to be that unusual. I think that time is coming. Open official contact is on the horizon.
But either way, there are going to be some people that panic and are upset about it without question, no matter how it's disclosed. I don't think everyone's going to just think they're benevolent, like when they hear about it. There's going to be some people that are freaked right out.
Yeah, which, well, that's the pattern throughout history, isn't it? People point to the War of the Worlds broadcast and whenever it was with Orson Welles, where people did panic and, there was, some deaths as a result. But that was sort of a staged event meant to frighten people. I don't think that's how it's going to go down. I think what we're seeing is a very gradual, very controlled disclosure movement and a very controlled sort of contact agenda, which is why we saw the Phoenix lights, which came around, flew for an hour or two and left. And that's going to happen again. And this time there's more people with cell phones, and they'll probably come and go, come and go, come and go, and then come and stay for a little bit longer. And like you said, mentioned, boy, we are overdue. So I'm pretty excited about, I think, with disclosure stepping up a little bit, I expect there to be on the same, pendulum, a sort of movement towards contact. So hopefully we'll see a nice wave of sightings soon.
And finally, I know there's tons of UFO footage, both real and fake and not actual alien craft, but there's not a lot of pictures of actual ETs or legitimate videos online that I've been able to find anyways. Why do you think there isn't that much photographic evidence of ETs out there?
Because of the cover-up. I think if you look at some of the earlier stuff, I like the Jeff Greenhaw photos of a metallic suited figure. I think that's absolutely genuine. I like the Mexico City footage taken during the 1992 eclipse. I like the Paul Trent photos, Rex Heflin. There are some absolutely vetted material out there. A lot of it is the earlier stuff because it's so easy to Photoshop right now. And if you don't have a witness who's willing to stand behind their videotape, well, then I don't even want to see it because it's that easy to fake. Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think really there is an enormous amount of very high quality footage out there on YouTube. And you look at it and you're like, wow, that is absolutely authentic. Whereas there's other stuff, it's like, come on, how stupid do you think I am? And it's so souped up together in this melange of just literally a million videos that it's almost impossible to make sense of, which is no accident. I think it's part of the whole disinformation ploy to really, slow down research. UFO investigators have a real tough time of it because, they're working against the stream here. And it's got to stop. I think that at some point our government has to come clean. Otherwise, they will lose control of the subject. And it's to their benefit to really disclose and start putting money and attention towards this in a more public arena. And then we'll have some real progress.
Have you seen this ET photo that Dr. Stephen Greer has put out of the ET with this gentleman that supposedly had his hearing restored in this contact incident? Because I think that's one of the photos out there of an ET that's online that a lot of people have seen.
Gosh, no, I haven't. I haven't, but
Okay.
I'm looking. You can bet I'll be looking that up
Yeah.
after this interview because of, the healing aspect for one thing, and I'm known Stephen Greer for a very long time. Certainly, we've talked. I was part of his C-SETI group here in LA, and he's quoted my research, on how to contact UFOs using lights. Those were my cases. One from San Diego and another from here in LA. So certainly
Have
our
you
paths.
seen a UFO? I got to ask you about that. I can't believe I got it this far without asking. You mentioned how to contact a UFO.
Yeah, yeah, I have actually. Well, not until I started investigating this and started looking into it and going out and looking actively for them, and saw some anomalous lights. So I'm like, yeah, maybe. But have to tell you, yes, in 1992, and this is what 4 years after I started investigating this subject, 4 or 5, seriously investigating. I'm driving home late at night in late July '92, could have been '93, heading down through Woodland Hills here in Southern California, very densely populated neighborhood, but it's late at night, down a little suburban road called Tosca, and I'm coming around a hairpin corner, and this ball of light, I thought it was a bird at first, but it clearly wasn't because it came right up to my windshield, and it was this ball of light, like a golf ball, and targeted me is kind of the way I felt because it came right from my car and kind of crossed the windshield 2 or 3 times and took off. And that was the first one. But there's been others. I mean, one time this lady I was interviewing, she took me out and showed me a UFO flat out. She's like, oh, well, my friends have seen, my neighbors, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I want to see one. And she set it up. She's like, oh, yeah, they told me they're going to appear. I'm like, yeah, sure, let's go. Because I've done this before, and it hasn't worked out. And I didn't believe it for a second, but went with her and took my sister-in-law and my nephew. And I got ahead of the trail, with just this witness. I'll call her Wendy. And she grabs me and turns, and right next to us, my sister-in-law and my nephew were down on the trail, and they didn't see it. But darn it, right next to us, 20, 50 feet away, is this giant glowing object. Beautiful. It was, a sphere covered with golden lights, really beautiful and obviously unexplained. Big as a house, totally silent, about 20, 30 feet up, 50 feet away, and just amazing. And we're screaming and looking at this thing, and it's sort of, as soon as we see it really good, it starts to move slowly and then darts around the mountain like a bullet. It was amazing. So yeah, a number of sightings kind of like that.
And you didn't have a camera on you then, I guess?
I did. I
Oh,
did. I had a camera, and these things happen real fast. I have no excuse. It just,
and you weren't expecting it to happen. You thought the lady was gonna just tell it, be full of it, I guess.
yeah. Well, gosh, I kind of did. Yeah, to be honest, and I didn't think it would show up right when we stepped our first foot into the area where she said it was going to happen. We literally just got there. Literally topped the hill. She's like, it's right here, and there it is. And just so huge. And so unexplained. There's no way you could take something like this. I can tell you that.